On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. This week's On Story, a conversation with House of Cards creator Beau Willimon.
You know, a lot of people have asked in terms of Ides or House of Cards, the sort of axis of idealism versus cynicism, and I don't really see it that way. I mean, I'm not a cynic, I'm not a pessimist. If anything, I'd characterize myself as an optimist, and I think that in some ways the characters in Ides of March and definitely in House of Cards wake up with that same mentality. They might have a different ethical spectrum than most people in this room, but their impetus to reach out and grab the impossible is fundamentally an optimist sensibility.
In this episode, Beau Willimon talks power, marriage, and politics in his hit series, House of Cards.
There's no one TV show or movie or play or novel that could possibly capture what DC is. That's like saying, you know, you could write a novel about that is the definitive portrait of America. I mean, DC and the political gamesmanship there and that culture is so vast that you have to sort of pick your angle, your point of view, and approach it that way. House of Cards is an extreme example that focuses mostly on two characters, Francis and Claire Underwood, who are unapologetically self-interested. You know, they lack ideology in any form, and they're not afraid to say it. In fact, they see ideology as a form of cowardice. And that's an extreme view. I mean, most people in Washington are good people, decent people who want to serve their country, and that's not the story we're telling. The way I got interested in it is I'd heard of the BBC version, which is based on Lord Michael Dobbs's novels, and Dobbs actually was he worked for Thatcher. During the Thatcher administration, had a falling out with the Thatcher administration, and his way of taking revenge was to write his books. And he started literally with the initials FU. And he created a character named Francis Urquhart. And I got a call one day from my agent saying, hey, David Fincher wants to jump on the phone and talk to you about doing House of Cards as an American television show. And then, you know, I spent about a year working on the script for the first episode. We got Spacey and Wright on board. We were given the time, the resources, and support to tell a story the way we wanted to tell it in, you know, a medium that is established, but at the same time is going through so much flux and innovation and paradigmatic shifts that it's just like, it's a great time to be making television and not coming to television with any sort of prejudiced notions about what it is or what it can be. And, you know, when artists are put in that sort of environment, they come up with a lot of, you know, crazy and cockamamie, and some of it sticks, you know? So, I don't know, I've just felt very lucky, I guess. You know, it goes back to power for me. What interested me about Francis Underwood was a sort of Shakespearean character for whom there was no sense of limits. You know, an utterly liberated person. When you have no ethics or ideology, your possibilities are boundless. And that's why he would say ideology is a form of cowardice, because when you define your ethics rigidly, it prescribes your behavior for you. You have no choice in what you do. And he's a person who's all about what is possible, not what limits him.
Oversight, how do you expect me to get that through a committee?
When Linda told me to write it, she promised that.
I'm sure she said any number of things. Forget what they promised you, Donald. They want your name because it carries weight.
Well, my name comes with my ideas.
I understand, but you've got to be reasonable. This isn't the great debate. It's about passing meaningful reform. Maybe not everything you would have hoped, but help me help you.
That's going to take time. I those ideas I've been developing.
If it's time you need, I will buy you time. But you've got to promise me your next at bat is going to give me something I can work with.
Okay, Frank. I'll see what I can do.
Good. And Donald, don't let this get you down. Why, together we're going to do more than you've been able to do in 25 years. Two things are now irrelevant. Donald Blythe and Donald Blythe's new drafts. Eventually, I'll have to rewrite the bill myself. Forward, that is the battle cry. Leave ideology to the armchair generals. Does me no good.
Anti-hero suggests that there's something wrong about him, and you gotta think in Francis Underwood's worldview, there's nothing wrong with himself. He would look at Washington right now, and he would say, okay, look at all of these folks, like when the government shut down, right, who are firmly holding their ground, drawing a line in the sand, you know, and saying, aren't we brave for refusing to compromise? And he would go, no, that's incompetence, laziness, and cowardice, right? Because you're not doing anything, you know? You're just drawing a line in the sand. Anyone can draw a line in the sand. And you are justifying that inaction, that paralysis with ideology, right? And you're saying it's because it's the right thing to do. What is the bigger ethical breach? Inaction that leads to actual death and suffering? Or someone who says, let's get everyone together in a room, and if I have to intimidate, if I have to seduce, if I have to deceive, if I have to do anything and throw ethics out the window in order to achieve it, but I'll keep the government running, in a way, doesn't the ends justify the means? And I think there's something attractive about that kind of character to people. I think that someone like Francis Underwood kind of, in a way, arrives into the universe fully formed. And the most interesting thing about him is that you cannot pinpoint why. It's irrational. But it's an irrational soul that has huge consequences for all the people that enter his sphere. And I'm more interested in contradictions, not like what is the redeeming thing I can sink my teeth into, but when you see him go to the Sentinel and you see him interact with his old friends, and you go, whoa, wait, hold on, this guy is actually capable of connection.
Away down south in Dixie, away, away, away down south in Dixie.
Our show sort of relies on a certain complicity with the audience, like an intimacy with the viewers. You have this person who's pretty nefarious, but by having this kind of access and knowing how he's thinking, it adds a delicious element to it that helps you root for him, you know, despite yourself. You are totally breaking the fourth wall, and at times you risk slowing down the story or being repetitive or obvious. So we're really ruthless with the direct addresses in terms of what we keep in terms of rewriting them. You know, true political insight that it's maybe not something you've thought of before. That's interesting. When he's giving a worldview, that's interesting. When he goes, look, the rest of the world might think this way, but I think this way. That sort of sets him apart. And other times it's just pure amusement and humor, you know, just a sort of quippy line that gives you a bit of a laugh.
Power is a lot like real estate. It's all about location, location, location. The closer you are to the source, the higher your property value. Centuries from now, when people watch this footage, who will they see smiling just at the edge of the frame?
So help me God. Congratulations.
What doesn't work as much is when he's trying to talk emotionally, when he's trying to give you a sense of what he's feeling in real time. You know, I tried that at the end of last season, and there were a lot of direct addresses ended up cutting because I wanted to explore, like in Richard III, at the top of Richard III, you see Richard saying, this is what I want, this is how I'm going to do it, and he's constantly saying, oh wow, look, that worked out, that's cool, and, you know, I'm making my way closer and closer to the throne. And by the end of Richard III, he's saying, he's speaking inarticulately, he's speaking in real time, he's giving you contradictions that are coming with his stream of conscious thought.
Give me some little breath, some pause, Your Majesty, before I positively speak in this.
Eye-reaching Buckingham grows circumspect. Has he held out so long with me, untired, and stops him now for breath? Well, be it so. Lord Stanley.
I tried that with Francis, and what ends up happening is you feel like you're getting 80% of the emotional experience because you're trying to verbalize it. And if you shift in those moments to showing instead of telling, it's far more successful. Just as much as Francis doesn't represent all of Washington, in fact, he represents a sort of corner of it, the way we dramatize the press is in no way meant to reflect the way most of the press operates. You know, Zoe's story is one of ambition. She wants access and influence. She's not about journalistic integrity. She's about having a seat at the table. You know, and people who want a seat at the table will often do a lot to get that seat at the table. You know, I've had a lot of journalists who've gotten very angry at me because they think, you know, oh, you're just having this young woman drop her pants so that she can get the scoops that she wants. In actuality, if you think about it, she doesn't start having any sort of physical relationship with Francis until the end of the 4th episode. The way she gets in the door is there's a certain amount of audaciousness, but she gets in the door and she's able to say, I think it's the education bill that he's going after. And I also know that you really wanted Secretary of State. She's intuitive.
I promise you, absolute discretion.
So we're talking about trust.
Use whatever word you like.
Words matter very much, Miss Bonds. You should care more about them given your profession.
Then yes, your trust.
So which Zoe Bonds am I to trust? The one who wrote about the fireman that married the meter maid? Or the one who authored a very fine article on a new jogging path in Rock Creek Park? Don't be flattered, I read everything.
I'm better than what they have me doing. You know what that feels like.
Do I?
You'd have made a great Secretary of State.
Really, I'm telling the stories of characters who want things and are going after them. So I'm not trying to say, this is what the media is now in 2013. We try to draw from what the media is now in 2013 in order to be authentic. But we're not trying to paint an exhaustive portrait. The very first thing I said to Fincher, the very first thing is I said, I don't want this to be a show about politics, I want it to be a show about a marriage. And I want to do something radical, David. I want to dramatize a successful marriage. Because if you think of so much of, you know, really 18th, 19th, 20th century drama, it's all about how marriages fail. You know, whether it's Madame Bovary or whether it's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf or, you know, any number of television shows. And I wanted this couple who were so symbiotic and truly equals that the only people they care about in the world is each other. The only person whose approval Francis Underwood truly needs is Claire's, and vice versa. You know, and that sort of insulates them from everything else. I felt it was important to fully realize this character. And it was a struggle. I mean, she went through all sorts of incarnations until I sort of began to arrive at what she actually became. And it really came down, the moment I first started to really understand her, I think, is when I rewrote that scene, and I wrote it a gazillion times, where Frances just come back home after not having gotten the Secretary of State nomination, and she's saying, when we don't involve each other, we're in free fall. You know, and where's your anger? I don't see it. I don't see the Francis Underwood who I actually married. You know, I see someone who's being defeatist. And it's like the one time we ever see Francis being defeatist.
What do you want me to do? Scream and yell? Throw a tantrum?
I want more than I'm seeing. You're better than this, Francis.
Well, I'm sorry, Claire. I am sorry.
No, that I won't accept.
What?
Apologies. My husband doesn't apologize, even to me.
And I'm like, wow, that is tough love. Like, it surprised me when I wrote it. And I go, this is what it's about. This is what she's about, you know, at least in terms of her relationship to Francis. But another element sort of came to the fore, and this came a lot from observing Robin, who is extraordinary. But there's something enigmatic about her, you know, that I wanted to amplify. And I guess the best way to put it is Joel Schumacher directed a couple of episodes. We were talking, and no one knows more about politics than Joel. And I don't mean politics in Washington, I mean like human politics. And Joel said to me, he goes, there's two types of people, Beau. There's metallic people and there's porous people. And metallic people are made of metal, and they're shiny, and they reflect, and everything bounces off of them. And I was like, Francis is metallic. And he goes, and then there's porous people that absorb, things pass through them, they take things in. And I thought to myself, well, Claire is like 80% metallic, but she's got 20% of porous. And if I can dramatize that invisible line between those two things, then we might really be onto something. And that's what we've tried to do. And sometimes, you know, I will give you an example of something that I think failed, you know, like the origami, for instance, you know, and some of the things like when she gives money to the homeless man or she's jogging in the graveyard, I was trying to dramatize sort of, it's a very difficult thing to dramatize, which is someone experiencing the world, absorbing the world, you know, in a way that is personal and profound to them, but not wrapped in dialogue or not trying to put sort of literal meaning on top of it. And it's almost impossible to do, I found, you know? Because we had Robin, and she's electric anytime she's on camera, I think some of those moments really did register to a lot of people. And one of the great gifts she's given the show in creating this role is she's given us a character who truly lives between the lines, who realizes that the more she says, the less she reveals. And the less she says, the more she reveals. If you're talking about the superficial authenticity of the way politics works and the way people talk and the things that happen, that's the easiest thing to achieve. The much harder thing to achieve is the authenticity of the characters that live in that world, for whom these things are important, for whom these things are life and death. And that is something which transcends politics. I mean, a Francis Underwood or a Stephen Myers could exist on Wall Street, could exist at a law firm, could exist at the Home Depot where an assistant manager wants the manager's job. I mean, you're starting to deal with elements of power, and power pervades all of our lives. It's not limited to politics, because power is about interpersonal relationships. It's about the way that one human's aims and objectives butt up against another's. We experience it at home. I mean, sibling rivalry, or in marriages, or with your lover. You know, we're constantly engaged in power struggles. To me, focusing on that and finding a world in which you can tell those sort of stories, and Washington is a great one, is the far greater challenge.
You've been watching a conversation with House of Cards' Beau Willimon on Story. Next up, filmmaker Artiz Moreno and his short film, Colera.
Hola, soy Artiz Moreno, guionista, productor y director de el cortometraje Colera. Colera fue el primer guion que escribí con 17 años y desde entonces lo he tenido en la cabeza muy presente, pero no ha sido hasta ahora cuando he dado con la clave que consideraba yo que hacía falta a nivel de realización, que era dirigirlo en un único plano secuencia imposible. El rodaje fue un rodaje muy particular debido al planteamiento, ya que buscábamos una luz muy específica, muy concreta, lo que nos obligó a hacer un plano al día durante 3 días. Ensayábamos durante todo el día y rodábamos cuando se metía el sol, con una ventana alrededor de unos 10-15 minutos de luz para tirar la toma. Por lo tanto, pues fue un reto técnico para nosotros, pero estamos muy contentos con el resultado y nada, espero que lo disfrutéis.
oyes? ¡Vamos, sal de ahí!
Lleva meses ahí dentro. Puede que ya esté muerto.
Coño, va a estar muerto.
¡Ey! ¡Apestado! ¡Vamos, sal de ahí!
No le toquéis.
¡Fuera! ¡Fuera, fuera! ¡Largo de aquí! ¡Fuera de este pueblo! ¡No te queremos aquí! ¡Largo de este pueblo!
Por fin tenemos un pueblo limpio.
Señora.
For more On Story, check out our free podcast at onstory.tv or search the iTunes Store and get the book today, On Story, Screenwriters and Their Craft, on Amazon.